He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a shout. "If you do not stop your nervous babbling," he said, his icy blue-gray eyes locking onto mine, "I will have to kiss you quiet." The Moscow skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, $1 billion in deals hanging on my next trembling word. I was a last-minute replacement, a language student, and my panic had just provoked a warning from one of Russia's most dangerous men. My name was Emily, a final-year linguistics student, and 30 seconds ago, I had been certain this was just a freelance gig. Now, the man across the table wasn't just a client. He was Arkady Volkov, an oligarch whose name was synonymous with ruined competitors and vanished problems. I was the last-minute translator for a mineral rights deal worth billions, and my nervous, rambling attempt to clarify a term had just shattered the tension into something far more dangerous. This is what happens when the wrong person hears the wrong word at the worst possible time. 12 hours earlier, my biggest worry was affording next semester's textbooks. The call from the university's linguistics department came at 8 a.m., a panicked assistant professor explaining that their regular interpreter for the Eastern European Trade Summit had severe food poisoning. The summit was a closed-door, high-security affair at the Metropole Hotel, connecting Western venture capitalists with post-Soviet industrialists. They needed a fluent Russian speaker with a background in economic terminology, and my name was at the top of the substitute list. The fee they quoted was more than I made in 3 months at the campus library. I said yes before I fully processed the risk. My Russian was academic, honed on Tolstoy and Pushkin, not on boardroom contracts about nickel mines and pipeline rights. I spent the morning in a frantic blur scanning glossaries of industrial terms, watching news clips of the attending oligarchs. One name dominated the warnings: Arkady Volkov, a man in his late 40s who had emerged from the aluminum wars of the 90s with an empire of mines and a reputation for brutal efficiency. News profiles used phrases like ruthless pragmatist and coldly strategic. There were no photographs of him smiling. The Metropole was a fortress of old-world opulence and new-world security. My student ID was scrutinized by men in dark suits with earpieces. I was shepherded into a holding room with 3 other last-minute substitutes, a nervous tech translator, a weary legal consultant, and me. A severe woman from the summit's organizing committee handed us laminated badges and a single non-negotiable rule: translate, do not interpret, do not explain, do not offer opinion. Your voice is only a vessel for the words spoken by your principal. My principal was Thomas Shaw, the CEO of a Boston-based investment firm looking to secure a stake in a Siberian rare earth mineral deposit. He was in his 50s, with the trim posture of a former athlete and eyes that missed nothing. "Just be accurate, be clear, and for God's sake, don't panic," he told me during our 90-second briefing. "Volkov likes to play games. He'll use silence, he'll use ambiguity. Your job is to make sure none of that comes from you." I nodded, my throat dry. The negotiation room was shockingly quiet. The air was cool, smelling of polished wood and expensive coffee. On one side, Shaw, his CFO, and me. On the other, Arkady Volkov, alone except for a silent aide standing against the wall. Volkov was taller than he looked in photos, with that neatly combed light brown hair and piercing blue-gray eyes that seemed to catalog the room's every flaw. He wore a slate-gray suit, no tie, and examined us with a detached curiosity, as if we were a mildly interesting specimen. For the first hour, it was strangely procedural. Figures were presented, projections discussed. My voice settled into a rhythm, translating Shaw's polished proposals into Russian, then converting Volkov's terse, technical responses back into English. Volkov's Russian was clean, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth. He never looked at me, only at Shaw, as if I were a piece of audio equipment. I began to feel a flicker of confidence. Maybe I could do this. Then Shaw made his first major counteroffer, a figure that was aggressive but fair. I translated it carefully. Volkov didn't react. He picked up his pen and tapped it once, twice, against the gleaming table. The silence stretched. 10 seconds, 20. It was a tactic, I realized, a pressure play. Shaw shifted in his seat. The CFO cleared his throat. And that's when I made my first mistake. The silence felt like my fault, like a gap I needed to fill. In a rush of nervous energy, I heard myself speaking in English, directly to Shaw. "Mr. Shaw, I believe the silence is a tactical pause, possibly to gauge our reaction. The term he used for profit share has a particular concurrency in post-Soviet contracts that might imply. I froze. I had broken the cardinal rule. I had interpreted. Every eye in the room was on me. Shaw's face was a mask of stunned irritation, but it was Volkov's reaction that turned my blood to ice. He slowly leaned back in his chair, the controlled smirk touching his lips for the first time. He said nothing to Shaw. He looked directly at me, and in perfectly accented, chillingly quiet English, he delivered the line that rewired my reality. "If you do not stop your nervous babbling," he said, "I will have to kiss you quiet." The words hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. Was it a sexual threat, a metaphor for silencing me, a bizarre turn of phrase lost in translation? I was paralyzed, my folder clutched to my chest. Shaw was staring at Volkov, trying to decode the power play. Volkov simply watched me, his expression unreadable, the promise in his eyes clear. The game had changed, and I was now a player in it, whether I wanted to be or not. He broke the stare, turning back to Shaw as if nothing had happened. "Now," Volkov continued, now in Russian, forcing me back into my role as his translator. "Where were we before the interruption?" My hands trembled as I translated the question, my voice barely a whisper. The negotiation resumed, but the atmosphere had curdled. Every time I spoke Volkov's words, I felt the ghost of his threat in my mouth. The discussion turned to logistical controls, shipping, security, oversight. Volkov proposed using a specific, little-known port facility. Flustered, searching for absolute clarity to avoid another mistake, I overcorrected. Translating for Shaw, I added a rambling, unnecessary clarification. "Mr. Shaw, he specifies the Vostochny terminal, which has a reported history of customs irregularities, so the due diligence on that point would need to be exceptionally thorough to mitigate regulatory exposure." I was doing it again, explaining, adding, babbling. Volkov's pen stopped tapping. He placed it down with deliberate softness. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. He didn't look at Shaw this time. He pinned me with that glacial stare. "Your translator," he said to Shaw in English, though his eyes never left mine, "is a leaky vessel. She pours out more than is put in. In my business, a leaky vessel is not a tool. It is a liability." He stood up smoothly, adjusting his cuff. "We will recess for 1 hour. When we return, you will have a different vessel, or there will be no more discussions." He walked out, his aide opening the door silently behind him. The weight of his exit felt physical. Shaw turned to me, his face pale with fury. "You just sank a 9-figure deal," he said, his voice low and venomous. "Get out, wait in the holding room, don't speak to anyone." I stumbled out, the eyes of the security staff like needles in my back. In the sterile holding room, the other substitutes had left for their assignments. I was alone with the hum of a vending machine and the crushing certainty that my career was over before it began. I replayed the moment endlessly. The silence, my panic, his threat. "Kiss you quiet." What did it mean? 20 minutes later, the door opened. It wasn't Shaw or the committee woman. It was Volkov's silent aide. He said only 2 words in Russian: "He requests." There was no question in his tone. I followed him, not to the main hallway, but through a service door into a dim, carpeted corridor lined with staff rooms. He stopped at an unmarked door, opened it, and gestured for me to enter. The room was a small, private salon. Arkady Volkov stood by a fireplace that wasn't lit, holding a glass of water. He was alone. He studied me as the aide closed the door, leaving us in utter silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was where the threat became real. "Your Russian is excellent," he said finally, his voice conversational. "Your understanding of contractual nuance is better than the man who was here yesterday. But you have a fatal flaw. You think your job is to facilitate understanding." He took a slow sip of water. "It is not. Your job is to transmit power. My power, his power. You are a wire. When a wire carries a signal it does not like, it does not comment on the signal. It carries it, or it is replaced." I couldn't speak. I just stared. "You failed today because you were afraid of the silence," he continued, moving closer. "You tried to fill it with your own noise. That noise weakened your principal's position. It made him look like he could not control his own tools." He was close enough now that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the cool assessment in his gaze. "I have a proposal, a different arrangement." He set his glass down. You will return to the negotiation. You will translate perfectly, without addition, without interpretation. You will be a wire, and in return I will not have you removed. In fact, I will ensure you are paid double your fee. He paused, letting the offer hang. But there is a condition. After today, you will be available to me for future consultations on a discreet basis. It wasn't a job offer, it was a claim. He was recruiting an asset, one he had seen crack under pressure and now believed he could control. The danger of the situation snapped into horrifying focus. This wasn't about a translation error. This was about him identifying a weakness and exploiting it, pulling me into his orbit with a mixture of intimidation and reward. Before I could even form a refusal, he added the final, chilling piece. And you will explain to Mr. Shaw that your earlier performance was a calculated distraction at my request, a test of his composure, which he failed. You will tell him you work for me. My mind reeled. He wasn't just claiming me, he was ordering me to burn my only bridge back to legitimacy, to embed myself in his narrative as a double agent. If I agreed, I belonged to him. If I refused, he would tell Shaw I was his plant anyway, destroying me out of spite. I was trapped in a box of his design, and the only way out was deeper in. He leaned against the table, waiting for my answer, the city's dusk skyline framing him through the window. The controlled smirk was back. He knew he had already won. The question was no longer if I would comply, but how much of myself would be left when I did, and what would happen when Shaw heard the lie that would change everything. The lie felt like ash in my mouth. I looked at Arkady Volkov, at his patient, predatory stillness, and understood this was not a negotiation. It was an initiation, a test of my compliance with my future as the currency. If I said no, he would ruin me with a phone call. If I said yes, I stepped into a shadow world. I gave the smallest nod. His smirk deepened, not into a smile, but into a seal of possession. He gestured to the door. The recess ends in 18 minutes. Do not be late. I walked back to the holding room on unsteady legs, my mind screaming. I had to sell the lie to Shaw, a man who already saw me as the reason his deal was crumbling. When the committee woman fetched me, her expression was frosty. Mr. Shaw will see you, briefly. Shaw was in a smaller adjacent meeting room, staring out at the Moscow skyline. He turned as I entered, his anger now cooled into something harder, more dangerous. Well, are you here to apologize or to collect your things? I took a breath, channeling every terrible acting class I'd ever taken. Mr. Shaw, you need to understand what just happened. The interruption, my commentary, it wasn't a mistake. The words tasted bitter. Mr. Volkov instructed me to test you, to see if you would become flustered, if you would lose focus. It was a probe of your temperament. Shaw's eyes narrowed to slits. He didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. You expect me to believe that you, a student, were running a covert stress test for Arkady Volkov? It's why I was available last minute, I pressed, the lie coiling tighter. My academic record in linguistics and behavioral studies made me a suitable asset for this kind of assessment. The university department is flexible with certain confidential contracts. I was weaving a web from whole cloth, each thread more fragile than the last. He studied me, and I saw the calculation begin. The anger was being pushed aside by a colder, strategic mind. Could it be true? In the world of billion-dollar deals with men like Volkov, such tactics were not unheard of. A weakness for plausible deniability opened in his skepticism. Why would he reveal it? Shaw asked, his voice low. Because you failed, I said, the cruelty of the statement making my stomach turn. He saw the reaction he wanted. Now he's offering a path forward, but only if I continue to translate. He finds the idea of replacing me inelegant, but the dynamic has changed. He respects the game, not the player who loses it. Shaw turned back to the window. I could see his reflection, the tight line of his jaw. He was buying it, not because it was good, but because it was a narrative that preserved his own sense of control. He wasn't outplayed by a student, he was tested by a master, and it offered a way to salvage the deal. Fine, he said finally, not looking at me. You finish this, you translate, nothing more. But if this is another one of your performances, I will ensure you never work in this city, in any city again. Is that clear? Crystal, I whispered. Walking back into the main negotiation room was like walking into a silent thunderstorm. Volkov was already seated, looking utterly relaxed. He glanced at me, a flicker of approval in his eyes. He had heard my compliance in my posture. The session resumed. For the next 2 hours, I was the perfect wire. My voice was flat, my translations surgically precise. I transmitted power just as he had ordered. The deal inched forward, clauses agreed upon, numbers settled. Shaw was coldly efficient, Volkov implacable. They were speaking through two entirely different people, and I was the ghost in the machine. When the session adjourned with a provisional agreement in principle, the relief in the room was palpable, but it bypassed me completely. Shaw left without a word to me. Volkov stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and as he passed my chair, he dropped a single, plain white business card on the table in front of me. It held only a Moscow phone number, printed in stark black ink. He didn't pause. He didn't look back. The aftermath was a blur of hollow formalities. I was paid in cash, a thick envelope that felt dirty in my hands. The committee woman dismissed me with a warning about professional discretion. I rode the elevator down to the lobby surrounded by men discussing millions, feeling like a ghost. Outside, the cold Moscow air was a shock. I had done it. I had survived. And in doing so, I had bound myself to a monster. Back in my tiny rented room near the university, I threw the envelope of cash on the bed and stared at the white card. A single phone number, a lifeline to a world I never wanted. I broke down then, the adrenaline crash leaving me shaking. What had I done? I had lied to a powerful man, committed a form of professional fraud, and become the temporary asset of a Russian oligarch. I Googled Arkady Volkov with a new, terrified perspective. The search results were sanitized, corporate biographies, charity donations, but in the deeper forums, the whispers in translated comments, a different picture emerged. Mentions of aluminum wars that were literal street battles in the 90s, a rival found dead in a suspicious sauna accident, a journalist who wrote an expose vanishing mid-research. The term "kiss you quiet" yielded nothing. It was his own phrase, a signature. 3 days passed in a paranoid haze. I jumped at every knock, scrutinized every unfamiliar face on the metro. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was in Russian. The wire requires testing. Vostochny Terminal, Logistics Annex, page 7, third paragraph. Be prepared to discuss nuances tomorrow, 10 a.m. It was signed with a simple V. My blood ran cold. Vostochny, the port facility I had nervously rambled about. This was not a coincidence. This was a callback, a reminder that he owned my mistake. And be prepared to discuss meant another meeting, another test. I spent the night buried in dry logistics documents, trying to understand what about that annex was so critical. The language was dense, bureaucratic, but as I cross-referenced terms, a pattern emerged. The annex described customs clearance protocols that relied on a specific, now-defunct regulatory exception. An exception that had been repealed 6 months prior due to corruption scandals. My nervous babbling in the boardroom hadn't just been unprofessional, it had accidentally highlighted a fatal flaw in Volkov's proposal. A flaw that could sink the entire shipping arrangement and cost him millions. I hadn't been a leaky vessel. I had been a canary in a coal mine, and he hadn't missed a single chirp. The meeting the next morning was not at the Metropole. The address led to a modern, anonymous office tower in Moscow City. The aide met me in the lobby and wordlessly escorted me to a high-floor conference room. Volkov was there, again alone, sipping coffee as he scrolled through a tablet. He didn't look up as I entered. "You have reviewed the annex," he stated. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "The exception in subsection 7.2, your commentary indicated you were aware of its status. Explain your understanding." This was the trap. If I said I knew it was defunct, I admitted I had withheld critical information from Shaw during the negotiation, a massive breach. If I played dumb, I proved myself useless. He was testing my loyalty, my intelligence, and my desperation all at once. I chose a third path, truth, framed as observation. My understanding is that the exception was repealed under Federal Decree 741. Its inclusion in the draft annex creates a contractual vulnerability for whichever party assumes it is operable. It is a landmine in the text. He finally looked at me, setting the tablet down. "A landmine," he repeated, a hint of that cold amusement returning. And did you point out this landmine to Mr. Shaw? No, I said. My role was to translate the text as presented, not to audit it. A slow nod. Good, the wire remembers its function. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the river. The exception is indeed a problem, but not for me. For Shaw, his legal team should have caught it. Their failure is his liability. Your initial outburst made that liability visible to me. For that, you have been inconveniently useful. The pivot was dizzying. My mistake hadn't angered him, it had handed him leverage. He now knew a weakness in Shaw's preparation. I was useful because I had, in my panic, served his interests. You will have a new assignment, he continued. The deal will proceed to the technical drafting phase. You will be embedded on the translation team. Your primary function will be to ensure the linguistic integrity of the documents. Your secondary function is to observe. You will report any further uncertainties in the Western party's position directly to me. He was turning me into a full-fledged spy. The fear was suddenly eclipsed by a cold, clear realization. I was in a game with no rules, and the only way to survive was to learn to play. But playing meant becoming what he wanted. I thought of the cash on my bed, the threatened ruin, the vanished journalist. I want assurances, I heard myself say. The words hung in the quiet room. Volkov turned, one eyebrow arched in genuine surprise. The aide by the door stiffened. Assurances, Volkov echoed, the word soft and dangerous. My safety, my academic status. This arrangement cannot follow me home. I do the work and then I walk away. Clean. He chuckled, a low, dry sound. You are in no position to make demands, little wire. Every wire has a breaking point, I said. The metaphor he'd given me now turned back on him. You identified me because I crack under pressure. That makes me useful, but also unreliable. Assurances aren't a demand. They're a condition for optimal performance. You want a clear signal. I need to know the voltage won't kill me. The silence that followed was the most terrifying of my life. He was evaluating me again, but this time I saw a flicker of something new, not anger, but interest. A chess player noticing an unexpected move. Very well, he said after an eternity. Do this work and you will be compensated fairly. Your role will remain confidential, and when the deal is closed, the wire is retired. But understand this, clean walks are a fantasy. Once you have carried a signal like this, you are always capable of carrying it. I will remember you. That is the only assurance that matters. It was the best I would get. A promise of amnesia I knew he would never grant. I nodded my agreement. The next 2 weeks were a deep dive into a new kind of hell. I was placed on the joint legal translation team, working in a secure office with 2 other translators. My world became a prison of contracts, clauses, and subclauses. I translated diligently, but my real work happened in the margins. I noted every hesitation from Shaw's lawyers, every point they conceded too quickly, every term they fumbled to explain. I filed dry, factual reports via encrypted email to a blind address. I also dug deeper into Vostochny. Using university academic databases, I bypassed simple news searches and found obscure trade compliance journals. The repealed exception wasn't just about corruption. It was linked to a sanction-busting scheme involving dual-use technology shipments. The port wasn't just a logistical node. It was a potential geopolitical trigger. Volkov wasn't just securing a mining deal. He was potentially building a sanctioned supply chain. The weight of this knowledge was suffocating. I was no longer just translating contracts. I was facilitating something that could have serious international repercussions. I was complicit. The envelope of cash on my dresser felt like evidence. Then the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the other translators, an older woman named Galina, noticed my lingering focus on the logistics annexes over coffee. You are very thorough with the dry stuff, she said in Russian, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. Most young translators hate the port protocols. I gave a vague answer about being meticulous. She leaned in slightly. A word of advice, girl. Some ports have more than one map, the public one and the real one. Be sure you know which one your principals are using. She walked away, leaving me frozen. It was a warning, a deliberate one. That night I couldn't sleep. Galina's warning, the sanctioned journals, Volkov's chilling calm, it all connected into a terrifying whole. I wasn't just a pawn, I was standing on a chessboard where the game was far bigger than a mineral deal. I had to get out, but walking away wasn't an option. Volkov would see it as a betrayal, a broken wire, and broken wires get replaced. I needed leverage, something to trade for my freedom. My mind raced back to the boardroom, to my first fateful mistake. My nervous rambling had been about Vostochny's customs irregularities. What if I could prove those irregularities were not just historical, but active and directly tied to Volkov? What if the landmine I spotted was just the tip of a whole buried arsenal? It was a dangerous, desperate thought. Investigating Arkady Volkov was suicidal, but waiting for him to discard me felt just as fatal. I was trapped in the escalation, and the only way out was to escalate further. I had to find the real map of Vostochny, and I had to do it before Volkov decided his temporary wire had outlived its usefulness. The next move was mine, and it would risk everything. The real map of Vostochny wasn't in a database or a contract. It was in the silences between the words. Galina, the older translator, had given me a key, but using it meant stepping into the dark. I waited for her at a small cafe away from the office, my nerves jangling with every chime of the doorbell. When she arrived, she looked tired, but her eyes were alert. She ordered tea and said nothing until it arrived. "You asked for a meeting," she said finally in Russian. "This is unwise." "I need to understand the second map," I said, my voice low. "The one my principal is using." She stirred her tea slowly. "Why? You are a temporary wire. You do your work, you take your money, you go back to your books. This is not your war." "It became my war when he looked at me and promised to kiss me quiet," I said, the phrase feeling even more grotesque spoken aloud. "I need a way out that doesn't end with me disappearing." Galina's stirring stopped. She looked at me, a long, assessing stare that seemed to strip away my carefully constructed composure. She saw the student, the fear, the desperation. She sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "There is a man, a customs clerk who worked Vostochny for 15 years. He was encouraged to retire early last year when the new management took over. He keeps a diary, not of official work, but of anomalies, shipments that arrived but were never logged. Containers that were inspected by private security, not state officials." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Where is he?" "He is scared and expensive." She wrote a name and a number on a napkin, Yuri Dmitriev, and slid it across the table. "Do not call him from your phone. Do not mention my name. If you are caught, you were never here." Contacting Yuri was an exercise in paranoia. I bought a cheap burner phone from a kiosk in a distant metro station. The voice that answered was old, wary, and hoarse from cigarettes. I used the phrase Galina had given me. "I am interested in the weather patterns at the port." A long silence then. "The weather is always controlled here. Meet me. Taganskaya Station, southwest entrance, tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come alone." The meeting was like something from a bad spy film. Yuri was a thin, nervous man in a worn coat, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. He led me to a dank stairwell that smelled of urine and concrete. $5,000, he said without preamble, for a copy of the diaries, no negotiations. It was an impossible sum. The cash from Volkov was almost gone, spent on rent and fear. "I don't have that." "Then you have no weather report." He turned to leave. "I can get it," I blurted, "but I need a sample, proof it's real." He hesitated, then pulled a folded sheet of paper from his inner pocket. It was a photocopy of a handwritten log entry, all in Russian. A date, a ship name, the Baltiaski 114 asterisk, and a list of container numbers. Next to each number was a code and a single word, redirected. At the bottom, in different ink, Client V confirmed, no inspection. My breath caught. Client V Volkov, this was it, a tangible link between him and a pattern of bypassing customs. "This is one page," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are 67 like it," Yuri said. 5,000, 1 week. He snatched the page back and vanished into the metro crowd. I needed money, a lot of it, and there was only one place to get it. The realization filled me with a cold dread. I would have to go back to Volkov, not as a supplicant, but as a negotiator. I would have to sell him something to buy my freedom from him. The irony was vicious. I requested a meeting through the encrypted channel, using the excuse of needing clarification on a technical term. The response was terse: tomorrow, 11, same office. Walking into that room felt like walking onto a knife's edge. Volkov was at the head of the table, reviewing documents. He didn't look up. "You have a clarification?" "No," I said, my mouth dry. "I have a proposal. I require an advance on my consultancy fee, a significant one." Now he looked up, his expression one of mild, bored curiosity. "How significant?" $10,000. A faint smile. "And what service justifies such an advance?" "Contingency planning," I said, the lie forming as I spoke. "My analysis of the drafting process indicates several potential friction points where Shaw's team might attempt to renegotiate. For you to be prepared, I need to access certain proprietary legal databases at my university. The fees are substantial. This is an investment in predictive intelligence." It was a flimsy cover, but it played to his own logic. Everything was an investment, a calculation. He studied me, and I felt his mind working, probing for the weakness, the truth behind the request. 5,000, he said. "Half now, half when you deliver the first predictive report, and the report will be detailed, specific." My heart sank. 5,000 was exactly Yuri's price. Volkov was offering me just enough rope to either hang myself or bind myself to him forever. I had no choice. Agreed. The cash was delivered that afternoon in a plain envelope. I bought the diaries from Yuri in another tense, shadowy exchange. For the next 72 hours, I barely slept. I cross-referenced the diary entries with public shipping manifests, with corporate registries, with news reports about sanctions. The pattern that emerged was not just about avoiding customs duties. It was a shadow logistics network. The Boltiaski 114 asterisk had been officially carrying industrial machinery, but according to Yuri's notes, its redirected containers were received by a shell company that, through a chain of 2 other shell companies, was linked to a defense manufacturer in a country under heavy international sanctions. Volkov wasn't just a ruthless businessman, he was a sanctions buster, a facilitator for regimes the world had tried to isolate. The mineral deal with Shaw wasn't the endgame, it was a source of legitimate capital and a smokescreen. The real money, the real power, was in the second map, the one that ran through Vostochny's uninspected docks. I had my leverage, a nuclear option, but now came the impossible part: how to use it. Going to the authorities in Russia was suicide. Volkov owned people at levels I couldn't imagine. Going to Shaw or the Western partners would expose my own espionage and likely get me imprisoned or deported. I needed a third way, a way to force Volkov to release me without detonating the information and getting us both destroyed. I wrote my predictive report for Volkov, filling it with enough plausible, minor insights about Shaw's legal team to satisfy him. I delivered it, collected the second payment, and felt no relief. The diaries were a time bomb under my floorboards. Then the summons came, not to the office, but to a private residence, a dacha outside the city. The message was clear: this was not business, this was something else. The aide drove me in silence through birch forests dusted with early snow. The dacha was a modern, low-slung fortress of glass and steel, all sharp angles against the soft landscape. Volkov met me at the door, dressed in casual clothes that did nothing to soften him. "Come," he said, "we will talk without the noise of the city." He led me to a study with a fireplace where a low fire crackled. He poured 2 glasses of brandy, handed one to me. "Your report was adequate," he said. "You are learning to think strategically, to see the board, not just the pieces." "I had a good teacher," I said, the words tasting like ash. He nodded, accepting the twisted compliment. "The deal will sign next week. Your work, as we agreed, will be concluded. You will return to your studies." He took a sip. "But I find I am reluctant to lose a useful tool." The cold dread returned. This was it, the moment he would make the temporary permanent. "I have a new venture," he continued. "In Central Asia, it requires a delicate touch with language and local sensitivities. The pay would be substantial, the experience unparalleled." It was an offer I couldn't refuse, wrapped in the velvet of opportunity, A lifetime sentence in his service. My hand tightened around the brandy glass. I thought of the diaries, of the word redirected, of the sanctions. I had one move left, a desperate, all-in bluff. "I'm flattered," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "but I must decline. My path lies elsewhere." His smirk faded, replaced by a flat, dangerous neutrality. "That is unfortunate." "It is," I agreed. "But before I go, I feel obligated, as your former consultant, to point out a vulnerability you may have missed." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Go on." "The Vostochny workflow. It's elegant, but it relies on a static understanding of oversight. My academic research into transshipment interdiction suggests a coming algorithmic crackdown. The patterns your operation uses, the specific gaps in inspection timing, the container codes, they are becoming recognizable to new machine learning protocols being developed in The Hague. I've taken the liberty of drafting a brief risk assessment." I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. I didn't hand it to him, I placed it on the table between us. It contained nothing about Yuri's diaries. Instead, it was a brilliant, terrifying fabrication, a 10-page analysis, using real public data and academic jargon that hypothetically described a system exactly like his, and then systematically outlined how it could be detected and dismantled. It was a work of fiction, but it was built on enough truth to be credible. And more importantly, it demonstrated that I understood his system intimately. Volkov didn't touch the envelope. He stared at it, then at me. The room was so quiet I could hear the sap popping in the fire. "You audited my operation," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I analyzed a hypothetical vulnerability," I corrected. "As a final service. The document is yours. I have no copies. My recommendation, should this hypothetical system exist, would be to pause and recalibrate immediately. The window for safe operation is closing." I was telling him I knew. I was telling him I could burn it all down, but offering him a face-saving way out. Take the warning, let me go, and we both pretend this was a professional courtesy. It was the most dangerous gamble of my life. He picked up the envelope, slid a finger under the flap, and scanned the first page. His face betrayed nothing. He read for a full minute, then set it down. "This is thorough work." "It's why you hired me," I said, "to see what others miss." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. The predator was evaluating a new animal in the cage, one that had just bared unexpected teeth. And if this hypothetical operator were to recalibrate, the analyst who provided this warning would, of course, maintain discretion. "Absolute discretion," I said. "The analyst is returning to academic life. Her focus will be on historical linguistic shifts, not contemporary logistics. She will be a very boring, very quiet person." A long, tense silence stretched between us. He was weighing the cost of silencing me against the risk I now represented. I had made myself more valuable as a silent ally than as a disappeared problem. Finally, he gave a single, slow nod. "A boring, quiet life is a precious thing. You should cherish it." He stood, signaling the audience was over. "My driver will take you back to the city. Do not contact me again. Our business is concluded." The drive back was a blur. I had done it. I had forced a checkmate against a grandmaster, but as the city lights appeared, a new chilling thought occurred. Volkov had accepted my terms too easily. A man like him didn't just let threats walk away. He had the envelope, but he had no guarantee I didn't have the diaries. Letting me go wasn't an act of mercy. It was a strategic retreat. He was conceding this battle, not the war. I was out, but I was now a permanent loose end in his calculus, a variable to be monitored. The fear didn't leave, it just changed shape. Back in my room, I packed the diaries into a waterproof pouch. I couldn't keep them, I couldn't destroy them. They were my insurance policy, but holding them was like holding a live grenade. I needed to stash them somewhere safe, somewhere no one would look. I thought of the one place in Moscow that felt detached from all of this, the old university archive, a labyrinth of dusty shelves and forgotten theses. I had spent hours there researching linguistic texts. I knew its blind spots. Late that night, I slipped into the archive after hours, using a key I'd borrowed and never returned. In a remote corner, behind a set of moldering volumes on 19th century Slavic grammar, I sealed the pouch and tucked it away. I noted the location with a code only I would understand. The evidence was safe. for now. The deal was signed 3 days later. I read about it in the business section, a landmark partnership. My name was nowhere, as if I had never existed. My final payment, a generous bonus, appeared in my bank account. I transferred it immediately to a new account, half expecting it to vanish. It didn't. I tried to return to normal life, to lectures and textbooks, but the silence felt different now. I jumped at loud noises. I scrutinized strangers. I waited for the other shoe to drop. A week after the signing, as I was leaving a seminar, a familiar black sedan was idling across the street. The window rolled down. It was Volkov's aide. He didn't get out. He just looked at me, made deliberate eye contact, and then the window rolled up and the car pulled away. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. I remember you. The message was clear. My boring, quiet life was a gift he had granted, and he could revoke it at any time. I was free, but I would always be looking over my shoulder. The kiss to keep me quiet had never been a physical act. It was this, the permanent, silencing weight of knowing too much, owned by someone who never forgets a debt or a slight. The negotiation was over, but the consequences were just beginning. I had escaped the cage, but I would forever wear the ghost of its bars. And somewhere, in a sleek office high above Moscow, Arkady Volkov was already playing his next game, and I was a piece he had merely moved to the side of the board, ready to be used again if the strategy ever demanded it. For 6 months, I tried to live that boring, quiet life. I attended my lectures, I wrote papers on syntactic shifts in modern Russian, I drank bad coffee in the student union. The envelope of bonus money sat in my account, untouched, a sleeping dragon I was afraid to wake. I moved out of my rented room and into a university dormitory, seeking safety in numbers and institutional walls. The black sedan never reappeared. Slowly, the constant buzz of fear in my veins began to dull into a background hum, a permanent condition like tinnitus. I graduated with first-class honors. My thesis advisor urged me to pursue a doctorate. The world of academia stretched before me, a clean, well-lit path of footnotes and conferences. It felt like a sanctuary, a universe away from the polished menace of the metropole. I almost believed I had made it out. Then the first letter arrived. It was slipped under my dorm room door, a single sheet of expensive, heavy bond paper, no return address. The message was typed in Russian. The wire is intact. The signal is clear. Continue your studies. A friend. The word friend was underlined. It was him. It was Volkov. The reminder was as subtle as a gunshot. He was watching. He was approving. My life was not my own. It was a curriculum he had sanctioned. Paranoia returned full force. I scrutinized every new face in my department. Was the quiet Finnish postgraduate student in my linguistics seminar a plant? Was the too friendly library assistant reporting on my reading habits? I stopped accessing the research databases I'd used to investigate Vostochny. I avoided any topic related to trade, sanctions, or logistics. I became the boring, quiet person I'd promised to be. A year after the summit, I received an email from a prestigious translation journal, accepting a paper I'd submitted months earlier. The editor's note included an unusual postscript. Your methodological rigor is impressive. It reminds me of the work of a colleague who consulted on the Eastern European mineral accords. The world needs precise wires. The blood drained from my face. The mineral accords, our deal. This wasn't a coincidence. Volkov's network wasn't just thugs in sedans. It included editors, academics, people of influence. He wasn't just watching me. He was shaping my career from the shadows, grooming the asset he decided to keep in reserve. I flew home to London for Christmas, desperate for the familiar, for a place untouched by him. My family's warm, cluttered house in Wimbledon was a balm. For a few days, I almost forgot the cold gaze and the silent threats. On Boxing Day, my father brought in the mail. Among the cards was a small, square envelope, hand-delivered, with no stamp. My name was written in crisp, familiar handwriting. Inside was a photograph of me, taken 2 days prior, smiling as I carried shopping bags down the high street. On the back, in the same hand, were the words, "A quiet life looks becoming on you. Happy Christmas, A.V." He wasn't just in Moscow, he was here. The reach was infinite. The message was unmistakable. There was no away. There was only his permission. I spent the rest of the holiday in a quiet panic, jumping at every car door slam, scanning every crowd. Returning to Moscow for my doctoral program felt like walking back into a gilded cage. I had been offered a coveted research assistant position, a stipend that was suspiciously generous. I knew better than to refuse. I was on a track, a path laid down by unseen hands. Then the news broke. An investigative reporter in Riga published a bombshell story about sanction busting through Baltic ports, namming shell companies and corrupt officials. The details were eerily similar to the patterns in Yuri's diaries, but Vostochny was never mentioned. The main oligarch implicated was a rival of Volkov's, a man known for his brash, old-school tactics. Within a week, that rival was arrested on fraud charges. His assets began to unravel. I sat in my tiny studio apartment, reading the analysis, my heart thundering. This was no accident. This was a strategic strike. Volkov had used the blueprint of the operation, maybe even fragments of the information I had weaponized in my fake report, to orchestrate a competitor's downfall. He had recalibrated, just as I'd suggested, by making his rival the target. He had cleaned up his flank and eliminated competition in one move. And he had done it without ever touching his own Vostochny network. The realization was a cold splash of clarity. My daring bluff in the dacha, my clever fiction about algorithms from The Hague, he hadn't just accepted it, he had learned from it. He had reverse-engineered my academic, theoretical approach to vulnerability and turned it into a real-world weapon. I had been more than a wire. I had been a consultant in the demolition of his rival. My hands were clean, but they were not innocent. A month later, a package arrived at my department, addressed to me. Inside was a book, a rare first edition of Vladimir Dahl's Explanatory Dictionary of the Living Great Russian Language, a treasure for a linguist. There was no note, but tucked between pages 472 and 473 was a single plain bookmark. On it, printed in gold foil, was a logo, a stylized V overlaid on a circuit diagram of a simple wire. It was a brand, his brand. For me, this was the final, shocking detail, the payoff. He wasn't threatening me anymore. He wasn't even just watching me. He was asterisk curating me. I was a valued piece in his collection, like a rare painting or a vintage car. The Kiss You Quiet had never been about literal violence or sexual threat. It was a statement of intent. I will silence your chaotic, noisy, independent life and replace it with a curated, purposeful silence of my own design. And he had. My fear, my rebellion, my desperate gamble for freedom, it had all been channeled back into his service. I was living the life he allowed, pursuing the career he endorsed, kept in check not by fear of violence, but by the terrifying, patronizing certainty of his gifts. I thought about the diaries still moldering behind the 19th century grammar books. They were my last shred of leverage, but they felt meaningless now. Exposing him would expose the chain that led back to me, to my espionage, to my lies. It would burn my life to the ground while leaving his, I suspected, merely singed. He was insulated by layers of deniability, by real power. I was a student with a secret. The final closure came at an international linguistics symposium in Vienna. I was presenting a paper on semantic drift. As I walked off the stage, a man approached me. He was Western, in his 50s, with the bland, polite demeanor of a diplomat. "A fascinating paper, Miss Shaw," he said, using my name. "Your analysis of contextual contamination is particularly acute. It has practical applications beyond literature, wouldn't you say, in understanding how commercial narratives can become compromised." He handed me his card. He worked for a risk consultancy based in Brussels, the kind that did corporate intelligence, that worked with governments and multinationals. "We're always looking for sharp minds with regional expertise and nuanced understanding," he said. "Your unique experience would be invaluable. Think about it." I didn't need to ask how he found me. I knew this was the next stage. Volkov was placing me in the wider world, in a position where my nuanced understanding, my knowledge of him, of his world, gained in terror, could be useful to other powerful people. He was investing in my legitimacy, increasing my value not just to him, but as an asset he could potentially leverage in the future. The cage had no walls because the entire world was its enclosure. I took the card. I said I would think about it. What choice did I have? The promise of the hook had been fulfilled. A single, nervous ramble had not just changed everything, it had defined everything. It had rewritten my destiny from student to asset, from person to piece. I never saw Arkady Volkov again, but I feel his presence in every opportunity that comes my way, in every strange bit of luck, in the silence that follows me. He kissed my old life quiet, and the silence he left behind is the loudest sound I will ever hear. I am free to move, but the path is his. I am free to speak, but the vocabulary is one he approved. The negotiation never ended. It just became the condition of my life. And as I look out at my future, a well-funded, respectable, carefully monitored future, I understand the true meaning of his warning. He never wanted to silence my voice. He wanted to own it. And in the end, he does. So what is the true cost of a single mistake? We often imagine consequences as immediate, dramatic, a door slamming shut, a life exploding in scandal. But the real price is often quieter. It's the path not taken, the person you can no longer be, the silent restructuring of your entire future by a force that deemed you useful. Emily's story isn't about an oligarch's cruelty in a traditional sense. It's about the modern architecture of power. True control isn't always a prison cell. It can be a scholarship, a job offer, a carefully curated opportunity that makes complicity feel like choice. It's the understanding that your value has been assessed, catalogued, and integrated into a system much larger than yourself. You become a held variable in someone else's equation, and your freedom becomes a matter of their continued disinterest. The phrase "kiss you quiet" was never a romantic threat. It was a diagnosis. In a world of noise, of chaotic independence, the ultimate power is to impose a productive, elegant silence, to take someone's voice and not break it, but to train it to speak only on your frequency. Arkady Volkov didn't want a servant, he wanted a refined instrument, and in a twisted sense, he made one. This dynamic plays out in shades of gray every day, in corporate boardrooms, in creative industries, in the subtle ecosystems of influence that govern our world. It raises an uncomfortable question. How many of us are living on a path designed by someone else's calculation? How many of our choices are truly our own? And how many are the silent, approved outcomes of a power we barely perceive? Emily walks through life with the keys to her cage in her own hand, but the cage has grown to encompass the horizon. She is the architect of her own prison, built with the bricks of her intelligence, her fear, and her survival instinct. That is the most profound victory a person like Volkov can achieve. You don't defeat your opponents, you recruit them. You don't silence the noise, you compose with it. Her story ends not with a bang, but with a whisper, the whisper of turning pages in a rare book, of footsteps on a prestigious career path, of the unspoken agreement that now defines her existence. It's a reminder that the most dangerous contracts are never signed on paper. They are written in glances, in threats disguised as gifts, in the terrifying generosity of those who see people not as souls, but as strategic assets. If you found yourself in that conference room, with those words hanging in the air, what would you have done? And more importantly, looking at your own life, where do you hear the echoes of that same, quiet control? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to dive deeper into the stories of power that shape our world from the shadows, make sure to subscribe. The quietest stories are often the ones we most need to hear.